Hi, we're here today talking about the core competencies of the Yoga Alliance 200-hour teacher training. We've got Parampreet here, our yoga philosophy teacher, and Claire, who's our lead trainer in our online training. And we're going to look at the Yoga Humanities Category. And the first section under history, let's look at those core competencies today. Are you ready to become a yoga trainer? Welcome to the Yoga Trainer Fast Track.
We help experienced yoga teachers become trainers in their very own yoga teacher training school.
If you wish it was easier to have your own training, we share tips and tutorials to make your wish come true.
If you're an experienced yoga teacher, like and subscribe to get free resources so we keep making more videos. With that being said, let's get started.
So hi everyone, I'm Aruna. Kathy Humphreys, also one of the lead trainers in the Ambassador Yoga online teacher training and one of the founders of the Yoga Trainer Fast Track. And we want to talk about writing your own manual. If you're thinking of writing a manual, you've looked at the core competencies, and for each core competency, you need to include your title, the competency, the description, and then how that competency will be assessed in the training. And let's look at Yoga Humanities. There's 30 hours of the 200-hour training in the Yoga Humanities category. And then on top of that, electives. We've got 15 hours of electives. Now, when we worked out our 200-hour yoga teacher training, it turned out that Yoga Humanities actually ended up getting a lot of our electives.
8.5 hours of the total 15.
Yeah. Let's take a look at each of the core competencies under Yoga Humanities and how we made the choices of what to include in our manual. But I think what's interesting to remember is that it's not just what gets included in your manual. You also have to know how you're going to deliver that information in the manual. First core competency under the Yoga Humanities is the term yoga. And this is straight from the Yoga Alliance manual. The description of that is: what content will your training cover regarding the historical context of the term yoga?
So obviously you are going to include in your manual a definition of yoga, what it means to you, but also what it means in historical context. So something to consider where we got a lot of our insight and inspiration was from the 8 limbs of yoga. And we make sure that we talk about yoga as more than just asana.
And I think one of the reasons there's so many hours of the electives in here is because, we're trying to cover a 2,000 to 3,000 year time period. So I feel like when it comes to this section, the humanities, it's also a lot about what you're going to focus on as opposed to what to include. There's, hundreds upon hundreds of hours of yoga philosophy that could be included. And often in longer courses, you could have that time. But in a 200-hour training, you want to hone down, you want to hit the most important aspects on that timeline of yoga history, all the way from the Vedas to the Upanishads, Vedanta, how that forms into Hatha yoga in terms of classical yoga, but also shifts into modern yoga as influenced by European involvement. So that's something we looked at. I know I'm very passionate about this. I could talk about this for, tens of hours, but we just had to cover it, reduce it down so it didn't take up too many of the electives. So those are all decision-making processes that's really important to do. And it's good if you can look at the whole thing first before you hone it down to how are you going to summarize it in a way that gives the students a real and genuine and, somewhat deep experience that yoga is more than asana, that it has this 3,000-year-old history and philosophy and thought and practice behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really the juicy part of yoga. I think the asana is like the doorway for a lot of people. But then when they start getting into the history and the philosophy, that's really, really the fun part, I think. And what's interesting too is that we talked about it in another video that each core competency has to have a minimum of 30 minutes in each core competency. Under the term yoga, we spend 3 hours on that. And obviously that's not 3 hours at once. That's spread out because we know that teaching methodology is that people don't learn like you just tell them one time. You're not just like, giving them information and they're a sponge that absorbs it and can spit it out anytime you want. You're repeating it over and over again, looking at it from different angles. So it's interesting to me that the term yoga can be 3 hours of training.
Well, I mean, that's the foundation of any philosophy and thought and idea, is that, that's why we have mantras, is you're repeating the same thing over and over again nonstop. But hopefully you can say the mantra once, but that doesn't mean it's going to go deep inside you and become a part of you. Because that's what you're really trying to do with both the yoga physical practice, but especially the meditation and the deep philosophy practice. You can know the terms, you can know the definitions, but for it to become a part of you, it has to be, repeated over and over and over again until it's just who you are. And that's the joy of this journey of trying to also teach these so other people can have that joy when you're teaching them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then when the teacher finishes the teacher training, it's not like they have to go back into their notes. They've just heard it over and over again, that they can live that training and just repeat back from just the essence of who they are, what they know.
Well, and that's what I like about this idea of defining yoga. There can be a short definition, but it's getting to the essence or the theme of what your whole 200-hour program is going to be wrapped in and bathed in, so that your students can really live yoga instead of just do the poses. Which actually brings us to our next point about the lineage. Your school-specific lineage kind of ties into this next core competency.
Yeah, that description in the handbook from Yoga Alliance, it says, what content will your training cover regarding your school's unique lineage and the intention for offering a training of this style? So how does your methodology prepare trainees to be teachers? And that we're looking at, when we designed our 200-hour training, what is unique about our school?
Yeah, absolutely. And things that we considered, we're wrapping our philosophy around and designing our curriculum around the 8 limbs of yoga, which are sort of the pillars of each of our modules. We also look deeply at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and have a lot of information and reflection and experiential learning around that, because Panoprit, you're right, you've got 2,000 years of philosophy, which is thousands upon thousands of hours. So we need to narrow in on what lineage is going to be important to your school and what you're going to design your curriculum around. And I like what you said about you have to kind of look at the big picture first and see what are your values and principles, and then tie the lineage into the philosophies that best represent what it is that you're trying to teach within all of these specific core competencies.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting also about this school's lineage, for instance, we talk about, ours is a Hatha yoga training. So that is the style of yoga that we're teaching, even though we have different backgrounds in training. I was trained as a Kundalini teacher originally in my first 200-hour training. You were trained in an Ashtanga style yoga in your first training, but then found out the teacher didn't really understand that lineage at all. So this is good to clarify. And we are looking at yoga asana as just one of the limbs of yoga. So we have the Yoga Sutras and the 8 limbs in our training, and it is a big part of our training. So that part, in terms of writing your curriculum for your yoga school application and writing your manual for your yoga school, that total in our syllabus, the total in our syllabus is 5 hours in this core competency. And yet we probably spend a lot more hours on the 8 limbs of yoga, but some of them are in other categories or in other core competencies. So when you're designing your syllabus for your school, you may be spending a lot more time, but then you're deciding, okay, this is covering these different core competencies. That may be, for instance, 20 hours on the 8 limbs of yoga, for instance, but you're dividing it into different core competencies. So the final one under the history category of the Yoga Humanities is the dates and key ideas such as the Vedas, Vedanta, Hatha, colonial, modern. What key dates and ideas does your training cover regarding the history of yoga? What time periods receive a substantial emphasis in this program? You're teaching that part. You did the timeline of yoga in our online training. And it was probably hard to narrow it down.
Yes, for sure. And again, as I said, this is something I'm very passionate about, and it could be hours upon hours of it. But, I know that you've told me that some people have gone through a yoga teacher training and then not even realized that, the original source material is in a language called Sanskrit, So just even, in that awoke in me that, just even having those very, very basic points in the training can be a great contribution and realization for a lot of students and for teacher trainers, that there is this extended history, but these are the most key and important dates and points to consider. And I know that one day we'll create something that honors that depth and length, hours upon hours of each of those dates, but you need to have it in your 200 hour in a very, very specific way that gets those points across.
And I think designing a syllabus is a little bit tricky in that sense, because just as you were speaking, I'm thinking, you're right, we could have a whole 200-hour course or more just about the timeline of yoga and the key players and ideas and concepts, and reflect upon that. But you only get 30 hours of a 200-hour, and within that, you only get a minimum amount of time. You have to divide those 30 hours into 12 different competencies. So it is, we always refer to it like a big puzzle. You have to try to put together and make sure everything works out to 200 hours at the end. So there's a lot to consider when planning your curriculum and your manual and your syllabus. And these are the sort of things that you really need to get your head around in order to develop something that's going to be approved by Yoga Alliance.
And also, I think the other thing is, we all can't be experts in everything. Like some people are experts in anatomy, other people are experts in asana, other people might be experts on the specific health benefits or the history. And, philosophy it's a big topic, this humanities aspect of it. And, you have to choose what you're going to go into depth in on, and where you might need help, and also where you need other resources. Because like I said, I've been studying this stuff my whole life, and I'm still deep into it, still learning new sutras and new texts all the time, because there's so many of them. So it's nice to be able to have a variety of experiences for the teacher trainer, for their students as well.
So that wraps up the core competencies under the history category of the Yoga Humanities, the term yoga, the school's lineage, style, and methodology, and the dates and key ideas, including the timeline of yoga. If you'd like more information on using a program that's already done for you that honors the roots of yoga, please check out the Yoga Trainer Fast Track or click the link in our bio.